He heard it before he reached the door. Something moving outside. Slow, deliberate. Just beyond the north wall, the soft compression of a footfall in snow, then silence, then another. Measured, patient, the sound of something that was not in a hurry. Isaac Mott stopped in the middle of the cabin and listened. The sound continued for a moment. Then it stopped. The silence that followed had the specific quality of a silence that contains something. Not the empty silence of a winter night, but the held silence of something that has stopped because it heard you stop. He stood in the center of the cabin for a long time. Then he went to the door and opened it. Snow, the north slope of the ridge, the timber line 50 yards out, the specific stillness of a January night in which nothing was moving. The cold came in around him, and the snow lay unmarked, and the timber stood dark against the sky. Nothing there. He stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the cold on his face, listening to the silence. He closed the door. He lay down and tried to sleep. He did not sleep well. In the morning he went outside and looked at the snow on the north side of the cabin. Unmarked. The specific undisturbed surface of a snowfall that had ended before anyone was moving. He stood at the base of the north wall and looked at the snow and then at the timber 50 yards out, and he thought, the sound was close. It was not at the timber line. It was close to the wall. He noted this and went to check his traps. That night, the sound came back. Isaac Mott had been spending winters on the ridge since 1882, 8 years before the winter that changed the quality of the silence around the cabin. He was 38 years old, a trapper by winter trade, a man who had been alone in cabins in the Ozark Ridge country, long enough that solitude had ceased to be an experience and had become a condition, like the cold or the dark. He came to the ridge in October, and he left in March, and in between he ran his trap lines and maintained his camp, and spent his evenings in the company of the fire and the specific sounds that a winter ridge made when the wind was still and the temperature was falling. He knew those sounds. He had been cataloging them without formal intention for 8 winters. The sounds the cabin made as it contracted in the cold, the specific pitches of the timber settling, the creak of the roof under snow load, the various vocalizations of the ridge's animals moving through the dark. He knew what a deer sounded like crossing the slope below the cabin, the specific lightness of it, the pause and move pattern of an animal that was alert but not alarmed, the particular crunch of a deer's split hoof in crusted snow that was different from the crunch of a single pad. He knew the heavier sound of a bear, though bears didn't move in January. He knew raccoons and possums and the specific sound of a fox moving in deep snow, the bounded gait, the 4-print cluster, and the different sound of a coyote moving in cold air with purpose, faster and more direct than the exploratory movement of a fox. He knew the ridge at night the way he knew his trap lines, specifically from long attention, in the way that knowledge became embodied and available without conscious retrieval. What he heard on the night of January 8, 1890, was not in that knowledge. The components were ordinary. The sound of something moving through snow, the compression and creak and silence between steps. Familiar components. What was unfamiliar was the combination, the patience of it, the evenness of the rhythm, the absence of all the behavioral variations that animals showed when moving at night. No testing of the air, no variance for terrain. No alarm response, just the movement, even and sustained, and then the stopping when he stopped. He noted this and went to sleep eventually, and woke in the morning and went outside and looked at the snow on the north side of the cabin. The snow was unmarked. He stood at the base of the north wall and looked at the snow and then looked at the snow further out, toward the timber. The snow lay clean, the specific undisturbed surface of a snowfall that had ended before anyone was moving, the flat even crust of a cold night with no wind. No tracks. He had heard something moving. The snow showed nothing. He noted this and went about his day and told himself the sound was further out than it seemed. He told himself sound carried in the cold, and at night on a still ridge it carried further and seemed closer than it was. He told himself the movement was at the timber line, 50 yards out, and the snow at the cabin's base naturally showed no track from something that far away. He told himself these things and believed them moderately and went to check his traps. That night, the sound came back. The second night, he was ready for it. Or he thought he was, which was different. He had his lamp turned low, and he was sitting in the chair he used for evenings beside the fire, and when the sound started, he did not move. He sat and listened. It was on the north side again, the same measured pace, the same patient rhythm. He listened to it for 30 seconds. He counted, and then he moved quietly to the north wall and pressed his ear against the timber. Close, not at the timber line. Close to the wall, within 20 feet, the specific closeness that changed the character of a sound from distant to present. Step. Pause. Step. He went to the door. He opened it fast, not slowly. He wanted to catch whatever it was in motion, wanted to see it before it could stop or hide or move off. He stepped out onto the porch and looked north. The slope below the timber line, the night sky. Nothing moving. He looked at the snow in the lamp's light from the open door. The snow at the base of the north wall, the snow that should have held the tracks of whatever had been standing 20 feet away, was unmarked. He crouched and looked more carefully. The snow was smooth. He held the lamp out and looked at the angle of the surface, looking for the slight compression of a track that the flat light might have hidden. He moved the lamp slowly across the snow. Nothing. He stood. He was certain he had heard it within 20 feet of this wall. The snow within 20 feet of this wall showed nothing. He went back inside. He sat in the chair and looked at the fire for a long time. The third night, he did not go to the door. He sat in the chair and he listened. The sound came at the same time, after the full dark, after the temperature had dropped to its lowest, the specific hour when the ridge was most quiet and the cold was most complete. He heard it on the north side as before. He listened to the pace and the rhythm, and he counted the steps until he had enough to be sure. Consistent, even, approximately 2 seconds between each footfall, the sound at a fixed distance from the wall. He had a notebook he used for trap records and weather observations. He opened it to a fresh page and began to write. January 8th. Sound outside north wall, approximately 9 p.m. Movement in snow, measured pace, approximately 2-second interval between steps. Duration, approximately 15 minutes. Opened door, nothing visible, no tracks. Closed door. Sound did not resume, possibly animal at distance. January 9th. Sound again, north side, same time. Same rhythm. Pressed ear to wall, close, within 20 feet. Went to door fast, nothing. No tracks. Sound did not resume. January 10th. Sound again, north. Side, 9 or 10 p.m. Same rhythm as previous 2 nights. Step. Pause 2 to 3 seconds. Step. Duration, perhaps 20 minutes. Stopped twice, briefly, then resumed. No tracks in morning snow. No explanation. He wrote it the way he wrote everything in the notebook. In plain language, the record of a man who found that writing things down was the first step toward understanding them. He had been writing trap records for 15 years, and he knew the value of the specific over the general, the dated over the remembered, the observed over the inferred. He looked at the 3 entries and at the pattern they were assembling. Same time, same side, same rhythm, no tracks. He sat with the notebook in his lap, and the fire burning, and the sound continuing outside, and he thought about what he knew. He knew he was hearing something. The sound was real. He had pressed his ear to the timber and heard it close and clear. He knew it was patterned, the pace consistent, the timing consistent, the location consistent. He knew the snow showed nothing, and he knew that when he moved quickly to the door, the sound stopped before he could open it. He sat with these things and found that they assembled into a picture he did not like and could not look away from. Something was outside his cabin every night. It was moving, and it left no tracks, and it stopped when he moved toward it. He closed the notebook and kept the fire going and waited for morning. He went to see Joseph Finch on the morning of the 4th day. Finch farmed the south end of the drainage, 2 miles down the ridge trail, and he had been in the hollow since 1875 and was the person you went to when you needed someone who knew the ridge. He was 61 years old, and he had the quality of a man who had spent decades in close relationship with a specific piece of land and who had accumulated from that relationship a kind of knowledge that was hard to articulate and easy to draw on. He listened to Isaac's account without interrupting. Then, "What does it sound like?" Isaac described it. The pace, the rhythm, the 2-second pause between footfalls, the fact that it was on the north side, the fact that it had been there 3 nights running. Tracks. Nothing. Every morning I check and there's nothing. Finch was quiet for a moment. "What's it doing?" he said. "Is it circling? Is it moving back and forth? Is it coming closer?" "Moving along the wall," Isaac said. "North side, back and forth maybe, but I can't tell the direction. Just that it's there and it's moving." Finch looked at his hands. "Bear doesn't move in January," he said. "Not in a winter like this one." "I know. Deer, coyote, fox, they'd show in the snow. Even in hard crust they'd show something." "I know. And they don't pace, not like you're describing." Isaac waited. "I've been on this ridge for 15 years, Finch said. "I've had things outside my cabin at night. Mostly you figure it out. You find the tracks. You figure out what it was. It doesn't come back." He paused. "Some things don't have a track." Isaac looked at him. "I'm not telling you what it is," Finch said. "I'm telling you what I know, which is that some things on a winter ridge don't leave tracks in the way you'd expect." He looked out the window at the snow on the south slope. "What does it do when you open the door?" "Stops before I get there." "Every time?" "Every time." Finch was quiet again. "Don't open the door," he said. "Don't give it a reason to change what it's doing." Isaac looked at him. "If it's moving along the wall and not coming in," Finch said, "then that's what it's doing. Moving along the wall and not coming in. If you keep opening the door, you change the conditions. You introduce yourself as a variable." He looked at Isaac steadily. "Leave it alone and see what it does." Isaac went home and thought about this for the rest of the day. He thought about "leave it alone and see what it does." He thought about what it meant that Finch had given him a behavioral instruction rather than an explanation. Not here is what it is, but here is what to do. As though the question of what it was mattered less than the question of how to live alongside it. He thought, maybe that's the right framing. He was not certain that it was. He was not certain of much about the situation, but he went home, and he did not open the door that night. The sound changed on the fifth night. Not dramatically, a subtle shift in character, the kind of change you noticed if you were listening with the specific attention of a man who had been listening carefully for 5 nights. The pace was the same. The 2-second rhythm was the same, but the position had changed. It was on the east side, not the north side, where it had been on each of the previous nights. The east side, the side that faced the slope down toward the creek drainage, the side he slept on. He lay in his bed and felt the specific quality of that. He was sleeping with his back against the wall. It was moving along, 10 inches of timber between him and whatever was outside, and it was moving at the same measured pace it had been moving for 5 nights. And it was not the north wall. It was this wall. He lay in his bed and listened to it on the east wall for 15 minutes. Then it moved to the north side. He lay still. He did not get up. He did not go to the door. Finch's voice in his head. Leave it alone and see what it does. He lay still and let it do what it was doing, and he listened. It stayed on the north side for 20 minutes. He tracked it, could tell by the sound's character when it was directly opposite the north window versus when it was toward the east corner or the west corner. The specific way a sound changed as its source moved relative to the listener. He tracked its movement along the north wall. Then it went quiet. He waited. The quiet had the held quality he had come to recognize, not the empty quiet of absence, but the present quiet of something that had paused. He waited and counted, and at 14 seconds heard it on the west side. The west side, the back of the cabin, the side that faced the deeper timber, the side he had no data on because the sound had not been there before. He lay in the dark and understood what was happening. It was circling. He lay in the dark and held the specific quality of that understanding. The slow, deliberate circuit of his cabin, all 4 walls in sequence, the same measured pace on each, the same patience. He was in the center of a circle being drawn around him. West side for 10 minutes, then quiet. Then he waited and counted and reached 22, the south side, then the east side again. It was on the east side, his wall, the wall against which his bed stood. When he finally slept, at some point past midnight, the exhaustion of the previous nights pulling him under, despite everything, he woke in the gray light of morning. The cabin was silent. He lay still for a moment, listening to the silence. He had been listened to himself, he realized. He had been lying awake listening to something move around his cabin, waiting for it to do something different from what it was doing, waiting for it to approach the door. It had not approached the door. It had circled. He got up and went outside. The snow continued to show nothing. He checked methodically every morning, not just the north side, but all 4 sides, working the perimeter in the specific way of a man who was reading ground. He was a trapper. He knew tracks. He knew what the pressure of a foot looked like in various snow conditions, the clean compression of fresh snow, the harder-to-read subsurface disturbance under an icy crust, the blown-over track that still showed its depth in angled light. He knew how to use the morning light, low and raking. It caught shadows that overhead light flattened out, and he used it every morning, crouching at each wall in turn, moving the angle of his head to change where the light struck. He found nothing on the north side. He found nothing on the east, where the sound had moved on the 5th night. He found nothing on the west, which was the side he had the least data on. On the morning after the circling, he found something on the south side. Not a track. He recognized immediately that it was not a track, because a track had a specific character, a depression, a shape, a direction of travel readable in the displaced snow. This was not that. It was a section along the south wall, perhaps 8 feet long, where the surface of the snow had a different texture than the surrounding snow. Not compressed, not depressed, disturbed, the specific word that came to him when he crouched and looked at it, in the way that surface crystals were disturbed when something had passed very close without touching, when the air displaced by a moving body had been enough to move the crystals at the surface without leaving the deeper impression of a footfall. He touched it. He ran his gloved fingers across the disturbed section and then across the undisturbed snow on either side. The difference was real. He was not reading it into the surface. The crystals in that section had been moved subtly, in a way that the wind had not produced and a foot had not produced. He looked at it for a long time. He wrote in the notebook, "South side, 8-foot section, surface texture disturbed. Not a track, no depression. Crystals realigned, possibly by air displacement from close passage. Whatever it is passes differently here, or closer." He stood and looked at the south wall, and then at the disturbed snow. He thought about what could move along the outside of a wall closely enough to displace snow crystals without leaving a footprint. He thought, it is not moving through the snow the way a thing with feet moves. He thought, that is why there are no tracks. Not because it doesn't touch the ground, because it moves differently than a thing with feet. He went back inside and checked the latch. By the second week of January, the sound had become a fixed feature of Isaac's evenings, in the same way that the fire was a fixed feature and the lamp was a fixed feature, something he accommodated rather than responded to. He had stopped going to the door. He had stopped pressing his ear to the wall. He sat in his chair, and he listened, and he let the sound do what it was going to do, and in the morning he went outside and read the snow. He found the south wall texture disturbance again on 3 mornings in the second week. On the other mornings the snow showed nothing. He noted this pattern. The texture disturbance appeared after the sound had been present on the south side, which was sometimes and not always. The sound moving on some nights through a full circuit, and on other nights staying to the north. He was building a behavioral record. Not because he expected the record to explain anything. He had moved past the expectation of explanation. He kept the record because it was what he had, and what he had was what he knew, and what he knew was the only thing he could work with. It had been there 3 nights before. He realized it had never once walked away. It had stopped, gone quiet, the sound ceasing, but it had not departed. There were no tracks leading off. Whatever happened to it when the sound stopped, leaving was not it. The sound started earlier on January 14th. Dusk, not full dark. He was still eating when he heard it on the north side, the same measured pace, and he put down his fork and listened. It continued through the evening and was still present when he went to bed at 9. He lay in the dark and listened to it move from north to east and back to north and then to west. It was still going when he fell asleep. In the morning he wrote, January 14th, started at dusk, continuous for at least 3 hours, still present when I slept. Gone by morning as usual. No surface trace on north and east. South side texture present again. He thought about the dusk start. It had been starting after full dark. Now it was starting at dusk. He thought, it is changing its schedule. He thought, or it is no longer concerned about the light. The night he opened the door and found nothing and closed it, and heard the sound begin again immediately. That was January 19th. He had been sitting with the sound for an hour, the circuit pattern moving north to east, to south to west, and he had stood up from the chair with the specific intention of seeing whatever was there. Not alarm, something closer to determination, the decision of a man who had been listening to an unresolved thing for nearly 2 weeks, and who needed to close the gap between what he heard and what he knew. He opened the door. The slope, the timber, the cold air, the specific stillness of a night, with no wind on a ridge where nothing was moving. No sound. He stood in the doorway for 30 seconds. He turned his head and listened in each direction. Nothing. He closed the door. Within seconds, he counted in his head and reached 4 before it began. The sound was on the north side. The same pace, the same patience, as though it had been waiting for him to close the door. He stood at the closed door, with his hand still on the latch. He understood something then. Not what it was, not why it came, but the specific fact of what had just happened. It had waited. While he stood in the doorway, looking at the empty slope, it had waited. It knew the difference between the door open and the door closed. It had been patient about both. He opened it again. Silence, the slope, the cold. He closed it. 4 seconds, north side, moving. He stepped back from the door and sat back down in the chair and looked at the fire. He did not open the door again that night. He did not open it again for the rest of the winter. What he did instead was adjust. He moved his chair. He had been sitting with his back to the east wall, the wall he slept on, the wall where the sound had first moved on the 5th night, the wall that felt most exposed in a way he could not explain and did not try to. He moved the chair to the south wall, the wall he had the most data on, the wall where at least he understood what the surface disturbance looked like in the mornings. He could see the door from the south wall and the east wall and the north wall's corner. He could not see everything. He could see more than he had been seeing. He rearranged the lamp so that its light covered the room more evenly, not more brightly. He didn't have more oil than he needed for the season, but differently, placed so the specific corners it had been leaving in shadow were less dark. He started eating earlier, before the sound started. He did his necessary outdoor work, the wood, the water, the trap checks, in the afternoon before dusk, so that when the dark came and the sound began, he was already inside and settled and had nothing that needed him to go out. He made the cabin a place he could stay in without needing to leave it, and he stayed in it. He stopped noting the sound in his notebook after January 25th. Not because it had stopped. It had not stopped, but because the notes were producing no new information. He had the character documented. He had the timing. He had the snow record. The record was complete. Riding north side, same pace, no tracks on each of the following 20 nights would add nothing to what he knew, which was, it comes, it moves, it circles on some nights, it does not come in, it does not leave until morning. He knew these things. They didn't change. He closed the notebook and kept the fire and let the sound be what it was. He thought, on a February evening when the sound was doing its slow circuit, and the fire was good and he was not afraid. He noted that he was not afraid, noted it specifically as information. He thought, I have spent most of my adult winters alone on this ridge, and I have never been afraid of the ridge. I have been cold, and I have been hungry, and I have been lonely, and I have been bored, but I have not been afraid. This is new. He thought, it is not as new as it was. He sat with the fire and the sound and the thought, and found they were all, at this point, roughly equivalent in his experience. Things present in his winter that he had no particular power over, and no particular need to change. He slept. This was the thing that surprised him later, that he had slept through it. The first week he had not slept well. The second week he had slept badly. The third week he had slept adequately. The way you slept adequately in a situation that was not resolving but was also not worsening. The body making its accommodation when the mind had exhausted its responses. By February he slept through most nights, with the sound outside the walls waking sometimes at 2 or 3 when it was on the east side. His wall, the closest point of the circuit to where he lay, and lying in the dark for a few minutes, registering the pace and position and confirming that it was doing what it always did, and then sleeping again. He noticed this process. He noticed that he had developed a specific response to waking to the sound. Assess, confirm, return to sleep, not sit up, not go to the door. Assess and confirm. It was there. It was doing the same thing. Nothing had changed. And then release the attention and sleep. It was a trained response, the way any repeated action became trained over enough repetitions. He had trained himself to sleep through it. He thought about this and found it did not alarm him. He thought, the body adapts to what it lives inside. It had become a condition of the winter, like the cold, like the dark, like the specific loneliness of a ridge cabin in February when the trapping was slow and the days were short and the evenings were long. He had conditions he lived inside, and this had become one of them. He thought, on a February evening when the sound was going and the fire was good, I don't know what it is. He had known this for 3 weeks, and the not knowing had not changed anything. Not what the sound did, not what the snow showed, not what he could do about it. The not knowing was a fixed condition, the same as the cold was a fixed condition. You acknowledged it, and you kept the fire going. He thought, it has been outside this cabin every night, and it has not come in. He thought, that is the only thing I know for certain, and it is. He sat with the word before he committed to it. Sufficient. Not satisfying. Not explained. Sufficient. He could live a winter inside that certainty. He sat with the fire and the sound and thought, some things don't need to be understood to be survived. And some things. He looked at the east wall, the wall his bed was against. The wall the sound moved closest to on its circuit. Some things you survived not by understanding them, but by making peace with the fact of them. He had made peace, or close enough to peace that the difference no longer mattered on a February night when the fire was good and the trapping records were in order, and he needed to sleep. March came, and the trapping season wound toward its end, and Isaac Mott began the slow process of closing the cabin for the season, cleaning the equipment, sealing the food stores, making the specific preparations of a man who was leaving a place for 6 months and who wanted to find it usable when he returned. He worked through the days, and in the evenings, he sat by the fire and he listened, or he did not listen. At some point in the first week of March, he noticed that he had not heard the sound for 3 nights. He sat with this and tried to determine when it had last been present. He could not be certain. He had stopped paying careful enough attention to mark the specific evening when it had stopped. He thought, it was here, and now it is not here, and I don't know exactly when the transition happened. He went outside and looked at the snow on all 4 sides of the cabin. The snow showed what it had always shown in the mornings. Nothing on the north side, nothing on the east, nothing on the west. On the south side, the surface texture was, he crouched and looked, the same as the surrounding snow. No disturbance, normal crystal structure. He stood and looked at the south wall, and then at the timber, and then at the slope. Nothing. He went back inside and wrote in his notebook for the first time in 5 weeks. First week of March. Sound has been absent at least 3 nights, possibly longer. Unable to determine specific end date. Left cabin for a season on March 8th. He packed his equipment and his traps and his records, and he walked down the ridge trail toward the valley. He looked back once at the cabin from the first bend in the trail. The cabin stood on its slope in the March cold, the south wall visible from the trail, the snow on the south side unmarked. No smoke from the chimney, no lamp in the window. Empty. He walked on. By the end of winter, he no longer listened for it, and it never stopped moving. Not until it decided to stop, which it did in the first week of March, for reasons he did not know and could not ask about. It had come to that cabin for 2 months and had moved along its walls every night, measured, patient, the same pace it had held on the first night, and then it had stopped. He returned to the cabin the following October. He had thought about it through the spring and summer, whether it was the cabin that attracted it, or him. He thought, if it is me, it will find me wherever I winter. He thought, I might as well be in my own cabin. He came up the ridge trail in the afternoon, and opened the cabin and built the fire and sat in the chair, the south wall chair, where he had moved it in January, and listened to the ridge settle into the October dark. The first night, nothing. The second night, nothing. On the third night, in the hour after full dark, he heard it. The same pace, the same 2-second rhythm, the slow, deliberate movement across frozen ground. No snow yet, but the same weight and patience he had spent 2 months learning. North side. He had told himself he was returning to find out whether it was there, to treat it as an open question. But he had arranged the chair on the south wall before he sat down. He had known. He thought. It never left. He did not open the door. He built the fire higher. He listened. And outside the north wall, patient as it had always been, it moved. These are the stories from the edges of the recorded world.